Always treasured the good moments, because you never know when it's gonna be their last or your last time with them.
My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak with you about our nation's unprecedented response to the coronavirus outbreak. Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic.
There's this virus that has exploded in China.
This moment in March of 2020.
I haven't heard anything about this. I didn't know this was even a thing because I don't watch the news.
And when I asked for some of the masks, someone said to me, "Oh, well, we don't have a big supply of masks because of that coronavirus thing."
Early March comes around and all of a sudden everything starts closing. One thing after another after another.
And we started praying and we said, is this going to become something big or not?
The coronavirus pandemic has forced churches across the globe to make changes.
They shut the church down. We as the pastors just preached on stage.
They announced that everyone had to go home because of COVID.
The University of Washington became the nation's first large college to close its classrooms, saying it will cancel in-person classes.
2 weeks became 3 weeks, and then 3 weeks became 2 months.
We do Zoom meetings, but I just fell into a really unhealthy routine.
Repeating over and over, what I was seeing in the news, X number of people are dying, and now this country's shutting down, and now this other person died, and they were only 35 years old or 25 years old.
They couldn't even go to the hospital. They would just be at home in their room or in a separate hotel room, and they would, pass away, and they'd be all alone.
That was emotionally difficult too. That was hard to process.
When did you at work start hearing little whispers of this thing called coronavirus, and how was the news station kind of reacting to it at first?
Well, we started hearing about it when everyone started hearing about it.
I was traveling all over the country. I was traveling internationally, speaking and teaching around the realm and the world of social media ministry.
March 2020, I was sitting at home in Michigan, Niles, Michigan.
What was the question again? What was I planning to do? Oh yeah, and my goal was really to study for my licensure exam and study for my state law exam. Both are required to be licensed as a psychologist.
I was working an administrative pastoral job.
At the end of 2019, I was finishing my first semester of grad school.
I can't remember the exact moment of when I wanted to run, but I remember it was an impulse. The day before deadlines were due, I got the application and you had to get 30 witness signatures. So I just ran around and I found friends and I was like, please sign for me. I want to run for social VP. And it was a day or two before. So I applied and it was just an impulse of when I wanted to become SA vice president.
I was actually packing my bags. I was with some friends planning to go to Nepal on a mission type of trip where we'd be hiking through several different massive mountains.
Around the world, communities are taking drastic measures to curtail the spread of coronavirus.
We had talked about starting a family, and so we were trying to save as much as we could. I remember at that time for the potential of having a child. So all of our savings was going towards that, with the idea that we would prayerfully try to start a family. I guess it would have been a year from then, or that next summer.
For SA elections, we had to run in January, and then speeches were in February, and then they elected them. So I actually was elected for social vice president in February. Then 3 weeks later, it was March, and they announced that everyone had to go home because of COVID.
And then the pandemic.
My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak with you about our nation's unprecedented response to the coronavirus outbreak. Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic.
At first, I thought it was great because when the lockdown happened, it started right after spring break. So spring break started, and then the pandemic happened, and the university was like, "Hey, we're going to be closed for another week, just for safety reasons." And we're like, "Cool, we get two weeks of spring break," and then 2 weeks became 3 weeks, and then 3 weeks became 2 months, and then within those 2 months, then they said the university is officially closed down for the remainder of the year.
My mom texted me actually in March, like the beginning of March, and she was like, "Oh, this new COVID thing, like what's your school doing?" And I was like, "I haven't heard anything about this. I didn't know like this was even like a thing because I don't watch the news." And we both got the email and we looked at each other and we're like, there's no way that this is true. There's no way we're going home and we have like a few more months left because we literally just got here 2 months ago.
The University of Washington became the nation's first large college to close its classrooms, saying it will cancel in-person classes and have students take classes and exams remotely instead.
Stanford and Harvard, they're canceling classes or they're going to online learning, not just for a couple of weeks, but for the rest of the year.
And when we saw the news, we're like, no way. And I remember, I didn't start crying, but I was just in shock. I was like, there's no way that this is happening or that this is real. To me, it was like, this only happens in movies. There's no way that this can happen to us. And I was just sitting in my room, looking on my phone at all the news, and I'm like, this is really happening. So I called my mom and I was like, Mom, we're getting sent home because of COVID and we have to leave this, like we have to clear out everything, like what should we do? And she was like, I was just freaking out because I was like, I don't know what to do. And she's like, Naden, relax, take a breath and think what's the most, like, what do you need to do first? Because you're gonna get sent home, what do you need to do? And that was when it just clicked in my head and I was like, okay, now we need to start moving because we're getting sent home for COVID. There's so many things that I need to clean, like take care of first before we leave, before I start packing my room. And I just took action.
We went on a trip with friends to Toronto, road trip. And we drove and we remember that was the first buzz about COVID.
Good evening, and we are back from Washington tonight, and we'll get to the impeachment trial in just a moment. But we begin tonight with the growing concern as the toll from that deadly coronavirus now grows, spreading from Wuhan, China, and tonight that first case here in the U.S.
And so it was in the news, and this is not really funny now to think back on, but a friend of ours, one of the husbands, it was kind of a couple's trip, kind of not, but one of the friends, he did not go because he was sick. Like, he was like very sick. And we were like guilting him, like, oh, we've been planning this trip for months and like you just left, you're not going. And so he ended up catching a flight to fly to Toronto after we had driven there to be with us. We're all in close quarters. We're in a small kind of condo. It's like 6 or 7 of us.
He is still pretty sick.
Still pretty sick. I rode in the car with this man. That's my guy. But anyway, fast forward, we come back home after the trip, and like that's when COVID hit, basically. That's when things were starting to shut down. And so in hindsight, he might have had COVID, we don't know, but yeah, that was kind of our introduction to COVID. And I would say like 2 weeks later is when everything was shut down.
Yeah, so really interesting you asked me that because actually I prepared for the pandemic a month before it occurred. So at the end of January, my mom was watching the news. She's like, there's this virus that has exploded or begun to explode in China. And she began to share with me about that. And, you know, I look at her and I'm like, wait a second, how serious is it? And, you know, we start to do a bit of our research and we start to really like scrutinize and observe closely and deeply what was going on in China. And this was January. And we began to follow it and we started praying and we said, is this going to become something big or not?
My first memories of actually like knowing that like, oh, this is something that is becoming a bigger deal was immediately after we had a tornado here there were some tornadoes that hit the Mount Juliet community where I serve in. That week, we canceled church on Saturday in order to help out in the community. I went to the hardware store to find masks for our volunteers that were going to be helping out on Saturday. And when I asked, I couldn't find any masks. And when I asked for some of the masks, someone said to me, "Oh, well, we don't have a big supply of masks because of that coronavirus thing." And I dismissed it at the time, like, okay, whatever, there's a short supply and somehow coronavirus is related to that. But I just dismissed it.
And towards the end of January, beginning of February, we start to realize all it takes is one person to take a flight over from China to the USA, and then it's in the USA, this virus that was killing people in China.
First case here in the U.S., the patient in isolation now being treated by that robot.
And so when we came to that conclusion and we saw that the borders of the US had not been closed, flights were still coming in from all over, we realized it was only a matter of time.
The second memory is we had a board meeting actually here in the Franklin Seventh-day Adventist Church where someone asked, "Hey, have you heard about the coronavirus and how are we going to be preparing in church for it? Will we be having hand sanitizer?" But for the most part, leading up, hearing about it was simply treating it as just previous flus that we've had, not anything that would cause us to shut down the way we actually had to.
24 hours before we were about to get on our flight, I was literally like packing my bag to like leave to the airport. I found out through the internet that all airports were shut down and that the trip was canceled.
Here is another number for you to consider, 113. That is how many Canadians have been turned back from the U.S. border because of coronavirus concerns.
Meantime, confusion leading to chaos at U.S. airports under the administration's European travel ban. Lines stretching for hours in New York, Dallas, and Chicago's O'Hare.
It felt like being in some sort of dystopian novel because we didn't know if we were going to be quarantined or if the 9 hours that we've been in the air, things had become so bad on the ground in the States that they didn't want us to get off the plane for those safety reasons.
And so I am so grateful that we had that shutdown before we were, ended up in Nepal and not afterwards. But that's kind of an insight to what my life was like at the time. It was quite a bit of a whirlwind.
I remember I was sitting at home and me and my wife were talking about this. It seemed kind of crazy that anybody would close anything or change anything. And early March comes around and all of a sudden everything starts closing.
Heightened states of emergency across the nation as a number of coronavirus cases soars above 3,000. Tonight, elected officials taking unprecedented measures to keep people safe. Illinois and Ohio closing all bars and restaurants beginning tonight. California shutting down bars and wineries and asking those 65 and older to self-isolate. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio closing all New York City public schools, affecting more than 1 million students starting tomorrow. Puerto Rico declaring a curfew and closing all non-essential businesses. And more than 40,000 residents in Teaneck, New Jersey ordered to self-quarantine.
One thing after another after another. It almost seemed like one weekend things started closing. It was right at my wife's birthday, which really kind of like flipped everything upside down for her birthday. It was crazy.
We actually went to the supermarket. I looked so odd in the supermarket with like a cart with 5 million things in it. And I filled my entire cart with food. I also obtained masks, N95 masks. I obtained shields. I obtained gloves, cleaning products, supplies, everything that you think you might need for a complete shutdown for at least 3 or 4 months is what I stocked up on for. And so that's what we did with my mom, actually. And about like 3 days before everyone started doing that in the U.S.
More on the coronavirus emergency. As fears of a pandemic continue to rise, people are scrambling to stock up on supplies, prompting some stores to start rationing how much you can buy.
There's a run on supplies this morning. Big box stores across the country are seeing the growing concern over the coronavirus here. in the longest lines they've seen in years.
And I had been telling my friends, something's coming, please prepare. And they were making fun of me. They thought I was losing my mind for purchasing so much food that could last for so long, and masks and things like this. They were like, it's going to stay over there. And so I was like, I hope so, Lord willing, but just in case, we were quite prepared actually for a pandemic. I didn't think a pandemic would occur. I thought it would be much smaller than that, but we did prepare. And yeah, so when it happened, and then people started to really, desperately, at least where I was living, swoop the supermarkets and buy all types of supplies, and there was nothing else available to others. I started sharing with my friends some of the supplies I had. When I saw that, my heart started pounding within, because I thought, Lord have mercy, like I was just preparing, but I didn't think it was actually really going to happen. I thought it would be at a smaller scale than what really occurred. And so, yeah, it really shocked me that it really happened, but I was prepared.
Well, as a result of the pandemic, we all know what happened. Everything went digital. Churches started meeting online. They started going towards, I think Zoom actually broke a couple of times. People started Zooming so much.
I probably realized that it was a really big deal and that it was going to change the way we were doing life for some time. The first week that we had to go virtual, which I don't even remember when that was. I think it was sometime in March, maybe. But that week when we received these stay-at-home orders, and I'm trying to figure out how are we going to meet as a church.
Welcome everyone to Mount Juliet Seventh-day Adventist Church.
And Facebook, church platforms increased dramatically. YouTube church platforms started increasing dramatically. Restream and StreamYard and all of these other platforms that would stream your service to multiple platforms increased. OBS started getting used, and Streamlabs, and all of a sudden this digital world blew up.
In many ways, COVID was kind of a moment of justification for what I had spent, years up to that point, really investing my life to. When I first had really just the vision or the idea that, hey, you know what, the church could maybe use the internet as a tool for spreading the gospel, I felt like I was crazy. The responses that I would get from church leaders or pastors was a very sympathetic kind of pat you on the back, oh, God bless you kind of a response. And so it was really, really frustrating. But then, when COVID hit, my email inbox just blew up.
In that week, it was a bit stressful. Do I pre-record? What are my options for having the message, but still having people get together and be able to still foster community?
Welcome to today's tutorial. My name is Reverend Nadine Sneeman, and I'm going to show you how to use Zoom effectively in a church service. One thing you want to do immediately you log on is make sure that your sound button is up, your little mute.
The number of pastors and leaders who now had to figure out how to pivot. They had been building their entire ministry on a 60-minute experience that happened on a physical location on Saturday mornings. And now they had to wrestle with the fact that, well, they legally can't go to their building anymore and probably shouldn't at that point in time.
That's when I realized, but even then there was some sense that it was only going to be for a short while, for 2 weeks, maximum maybe a month, and then it began just drawing on a little bit longer.
The coronavirus pandemic has forced churches across the globe to make changes to closure that couldn't come at a worse time for Christians.
And all the while, there were just ways where we had to pivot and adapt, and simply be flexible.
What do we do now? Does the gospel become impotent because our buildings are locked? And what does it mean if our message is so easily stopped? What does it mean about the structure that we've built, and what are the liabilities of that structure? So that first couple of weeks, it was kind of like in my own head, I'm kind of laughing and chuckling like, I told you so. I kind of tried to prepare us for this moment, but I was very intentional at that point to not let that be the message that I wanted to share.
The first week that we had to go virtual, we decided that we'd do Zoom, and that from Zoom, so we'd meet on Zoom, and we'd have the message preached there, and then we'd broadcast directly from Zoom to Facebook. But it was a bit challenging when you've never been taught how to use certain tools.
The learning curve is steep. It's really difficult. I mean, you are taught how to read Greek and Hebrew and how to study the book of Revelation and how to preach. And you're taught all these really valuable and important things in seminary, but what you're not taught is how to actually build community and how to create content online and how to garner attention and all the things that are really necessary for any message, much less the gospel message, to function and flourish on the internet.
Google to the rescue, you just Google it and kind of figure it out. And you have a little hiccups and bumps in the road, which kind of feels stressful because you want things to go smoothly. But we went through with that anyways.
This is not how I thought I would end college.
My school, where I'm from, has really been impacted by the virus.
We expected something to happen soon, but we didn't know it would be this drastic so quickly.
Since all the classes were in Zoom and we're at home, and I have ADHD, I literally would just like look around and like fidget, like I have baseballs in my room, so I got baseballs and so it was struggling for me because I get distracted real easily, just like how I am doing now. My grades actually went down a little bit.
Oh my! So right now, guys, we're out here with the SA president. I am SA treasurer, and that is SA media director.
I'm more important, you guys.
Oh, okay. This is my day, guys. Let's go.
In high school, I was always the person that was planning too. That's what people knew me by, and I would have all these. I would throw these parties, or if it was someone's birthday, I'd prepare something, and I knew everyone in my high school. So coming to college in Southern is bigger than my academy that I went to, because I went to Greater Miami. And I was just so nervous, because I was like, I'm gonna come to school, no one's gonna know who I am, how am I gonna meet all these people? No one knew who I was, I have to create my identity here. So I got to Southern, and I remember walking into orientation with my roommate Ade, and we were like, oh, where do we sit? And there's this one girl that was sitting in the front orientation. She turns around and she smiles and she's like, come sit over here. And I had no idea who she was. So I walk over to her and I sit down and she's like, my name's Amy, I'm from Canada. And I was like, oh, hi, Amy from Canada. And from then we exchanged contacts, and she just invited me to eat lunch with her. And then she invited like other people that she had just met. And that's kind of like how our friend group started.
Yes, I am! Oh, you are.
Oh yeah, wow! Now we're gonna climb Mount Everest. My friend Shine is an expert climber. My friend Shine.
We basically just created our little, community, and we hung out with other people. Yeah, well, we got home and all of school was on Zoom, so we do Zoom meetings, but I just fell into a really unhealthy routine. I'd sleep late, wake up late, I'd eat like one meal a day. It just threw me off of my whole schedule, because you're just sitting at home doing nothing, and all you have to do is school. So I was so lazy to do homework because you couldn't leave or go anywhere. I was in the same clothes for 3 days. I'd just go in class, I'd eat, and then go to sleep, just repeat. And it was just an old routine that kept happening, and I don't know, it was just really bad. I was in a bad place at that time.
You gotta watch.
Yeah, after a few weeks, a lot of us started texting again. We started FaceTiming. We even did Zoom parties. So I'd join on it, and we just talk and catch up and try to play some games over Zoom. But personally for me, it was hard to interact with them through technology. It just didn't feel the same. And I just get so bored and tired, and then I'd just be like, okay guys, like I'm gonna log off, and I turn off and then just go on my phone and sit on my bed and just be by myself. But it just didn't feel how it used to. So it was just kind of going through the motions of joining on it, talking, and they're like, oh, what's new? I'm like, well, nothing, just at home, doing what I usually do.
Pregnancy can be an exciting time, and for many first-time mothers, it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. But pregnancy can also be stressful, especially during a pandemic.
Truthfully, going back to November of 2019, really summer 2019 to be fair, we had always talked about being married for 3 years, 2 to 3 years, enjoying our marriage, and then having kids, like even from when we were first dating. And then obviously you add in the dynamic of the pandemic. So I did know that I wouldn't be able to be as present. So we had to calculate that. Did that bother us? We knew that we were going to be alone in that sense, that we weren't going to be able to see either of our parents. But those first couple of months, if we were to conceive quickly, we knew that we would be solo. But we prayed about it for several months. It wasn't like an immediate decision.
Emily and I had all kinds of questions when it came to having a kid during the pandemic. Like, is it safe? Like, is our kid going to be significantly at risk? What if this is the new normal? Are we interested in raising a kid with this being the new normal? And there's, of course, all the Adventist baggage of like, is this the end times? Like, should we have a kid right now? Is the second coming like right around the corner? And is it time to run to the mountains? And what does that mean if we have a child with us?
During that time, so come June of 2020, during the pandemic?
Yes.
June of 2020, the pandemic was almost, I don't want to say it was slowing down, but there weren't as many cases happening. And so for me personally, I thought, oh, it's only going to get better from here. And so we talked about it. And then for me also, I thought, well, the world is not ever going to be perfect when having a baby, so let's just go for it. In my mind thinking, by the time I have him, everything will be back to normal.
What do you think of a family or a person who leaves a church because of the mandates of a church safety-wise, or because of a mask? They leave their membership.
The next thing I was going to say will lead to that. So if I forget that question, I do not like wearing masks. But that's a personal preference. That's a personal preference.
Is anyone else just a little disheartened that we have another mask mandate? I don't think anyone's like overjoyed about wearing masks, right? Like no one's excited about this.
So there's like a divide. Half of the people don't want to wear masks, and they're angry at you for wearing masks. They're angry at you for social distancing, all of these things, right? The other half of the people are angry at you for not wearing masks, for not social distancing, and not following the protocols. And these groups of people are just, they're so sure that they're right, and they're so angry at each other. And it's weird because I think that they're trying to convince themselves that they're right when nobody really knows.
Both churches handled how they would meet a bit differently. In one church, we chose a hybrid option where we would still have in-person gatherings, but they ultimately were a bit more limited, but we offer virtual options as well. And in the other church, we were completely virtual for a longer period of time, and then moved to outdoor services. And but figuring that out, I remember the dialogue. There was always there was always in leadership discussions on how we're going to move forward with this, there was tension.
So would Jesus wear and promote the wearing of essentially pointless pieces of fabric which quickly become a carbon dioxide saturated, moist and warm bacteria farm?
And as a leader, that's really difficult to navigate because you want to keep people together and you want to recognize like what is good and healthy and necessary, and at the same time you know that people's spiritual needs have to be met, and so navigating that through different people's opinions, through just different people's interests and their resistance or their openness, it was all challenging.
So the first biggest challenge for me was that at the events, a lot of the students would just not wear their mask when they came to events. I remember one of the faculty member, they would just come to me and they're like, this student is not wearing their mask. Like, we need to shut down this event, or we're gonna shut down if these kids don't wear their mask. So I would constantly have someone go up there and tell them to put their mask on, or just go up to that person and kindly ask them, if you don't wear your mask, like, you're gonna have to be sent home because I'm gonna get in trouble because you're putting everyone else's lives in jeopardy. So that was like one of the biggest challenge too, just students not listening, because I wanted everyone to have a fun time, but if they're not following the rules, the school is gonna give me a hard time because, you know, they just want everyone to be safe.
We get questions all the time about mask mandates, and now we have one about whether you should wear a face covering in church. People attending religious gatherings should absolutely wear a cloth face covering.
So I'm in the lobby, and a person comes in unmasked, and one of the members goes to the person and says, "Can you put a mask on, please? This is our masked service." And this person declines and says no. And she says, "Listen, we really appreciate that you're here. We're glad that you came to church. We try to keep this one particular time as a masked only atmosphere for those who feel comfortable only in masked environments. And this is the last week we're doing this." And the person again declined. And I remember that person then turned to me and said, "You're the pastor, right?" And my eyebrows went up. And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, do I have to wear a mask?" And like the one member is looking at me and the other person's looking at me, and I have to give the answer. And I just remember I put my fingers together and put them on top of my head. In that very moment, I couldn't think of what else to do. I gritted my teeth. I was like, "Oh. You need to wear a mask because it's the masked service and this is the last week. I'm sorry. It's just what has to be done." But I just remember the difficult feeling that I had, the difficult position I was in, and the frustration, and just like, I don't know what to do.
We all have different political ideas, don't we? There's people on the left here and there's people on the right. And we're not trying to focus on those things. We're trying to focus on Jesus. We're trying to stay centered on Jesus and not let other things high center us. And so how do we as Christians not get hung up on the left or hung up on the right?
But praise God, we got through it. I remember talking about trusting one another to one of my teams. I spoke to them about trusting one another's expertise and also reminding them of the fact that we all had the same interest, the same mission. And even when we had different opinions about how to do things, we could still move forward together.
I do want to say that there were a lot of members that were loving and grace-filled. I think that was probably the majority, but the minority were really loud, extremely loud. There was a minority of people that felt that they were right and that we were doing the wrong thing, no matter what we were doing, and needed to make it known, heard, and felt. In fact, I want to say that was probably the toughest ministry stuff that I've ever dealt with in my life. I was surprised at what people would say and what people would do.
So what are the dangers of getting COVID-19 while pregnant? Why is it that the CDC has reported 128 women have died in the U.S. after getting COVID-19 while pregnant?
So I was pregnant September of 2020. During that same time, I started a new position at a new school. And that was tough because I was very anxious, very nervous all the time. Being in a classroom with students during what would be the second wave of COVID. So yeah, it was just really nerve-wracking.
Just all the implications of safety. Like, how do we as a family keep ourselves safe? And it was scary because at that point, at least the way that people around us talked about COVID, it felt like it was the bubonic plague. It was just this terribly devastating thing.
Going into work during this time, I'm of course pregnant. The school is doing everything they can to not have any COVID cases. But it was just still hard because our classrooms are not big, and we had students in there, up to 20 students at times. And so being paranoid, I would have all of my windows open. If it was summer or winter, windows were open. My classroom door was always open, and I set strict rules with my students where they could not be closer than 6 feet near me, just because I was that paranoid. And thankfully my students were really respectful of that. If they needed help, they would keep their distance, and I would try to help them as best as I can, or as best as I could.
I don't know. I don't know that we had answers to every one of our questions, but I'll say this. Being able to look at that in the rearview mirror, I'm very glad that we made that decision. And I think that just highlights about what's important about life. Yeah, like maybe longevity is important, and there's absolutely a value to that. But what's the value of longevity if you don't actually have quality of life? If you aren't able to share life with those that matter most to you? And I think that's something that I've learned in having our firstborn, is that we want to spend time. We want to spend this life well. We want to spend that time with the kinds of people that matter most to us.
Usually, there's lots of things happening on a college campus. But this year, the throngs of students, the intermingling of minds, are replaced by an emptiness.
From freshman year, Southern has always been a community-based campus where everyone ate together, they walked together, they sat together in class. Everyone was just close to someone. When we all came back for COVID, it felt lonely, it looked lonely. People all had to wear masks. In the classrooms, everyone was so far apart from each other, and you couldn't see their faces. You couldn't tell if they were smiling or if they were laughing. If someone would talk to you, you really couldn't hear them. And even in the cafeteria, they had like these plastic barriers in between each table, so whoever was sitting next to you or in front of you, you couldn't really like hear them. You can see them because it's clear, but it's like smudgy. It just felt really lonely.
19-year-old Victoria Canales was alone the night she almost gave up everything. Alone in a 3-bedroom apartment in Austin near the University of Texas campus. No friends. Her roommates stayed home fall semester. No family. They were hundreds of miles away in Laredo. Panic led her to stop taking her antidepressant medication, and her good grades were slipping away too, because she was not okay. Many students are not right now.
It was just so not like fun on campus. It was just really lonely. Everyone was just doing their own thing with their own friends, and it was just kind of dry.
The way I coped was initially I started watching the news to see what is going on in our world. And then I would call my friends that live in other countries, and I'd ask them about what they're experiencing, what's going on in their country, just to get more of like a general overview of really what is going on in this world. And after reading the news and listening to things and learning from other people in other countries of what they were going through, I realized it was making me feel more nervous instead of calm, because I found my mind like repeating over and over like what I was seeing in the news, like X number of people are dying, and now this country's shutting down, and now this other person died and they were only 35 years old or 25 years old.
Most of my family in the Philippines, they were older, and they did pass away because of COVID, and they didn't have the resources that we had here in America. They couldn't even go to the hospital. They would just be at home in their room or in a separate like hotel room, and they would, pass away, and they'd be all alone. And my mom would tell me that, and it'd be really sad. So we would just FaceTime them, we couldn't even send a care package. It was just really sad.
Give me a favorite clap in front camera.
My mom got COVID September of 2021. So thinking back, I kind of noticed, and everyone else started noticing that she wasn't feeling well. And I didn't even know that my mom went to the hospital until like a few days after she went in. The way how it was spoke, it was like, oh, she's just going to be in there a few days because she's having a little hard time breathing. So she was in there it was supposed to be just like for a few days. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious. Like once it got to like week 2 or 3, when the COVID should have been already out of her system, that's when it started to get serious. See, I'm not a person that tries to worry so much, because I know if I worry too much, I'm not gonna get anything done. So so when my mom was awake and was aware, and she was actually still able to talk and do phone calls, I didn't go back. But it wasn't until they put her on the ventilator, that's when my dad wanted me to come home during the weekends because he was like, we need to be together during this time. I don't want you to. He didn't want me to be up there by myself. That's the thing. We couldn't go to the hospital because of the COVID risk and all that. The protocol was that you can't have any visitors when you have COVID. So when we were talking to Mom, it was a lot of FaceTiming her or calling her. But when she was it was hard for her to talk sometimes because of since she was on breathing machines, and she had to focus on her breathing more than talking. We would just sit around at the house and just sit there. Knowing my mom, she was fighting the whole time. My mom wasn't the one to just like give up. She truly, I knew she was fighting to get better. And she was trying really hard to get better because she was yeah. when the doctors were talking to my dad, they said basically there's nothing else they can do, and they said your options are let her go or keep her on the ventilator. But if you keep her on the ventilator, even if she gets out of it, she's going to be a vegetable the rest of her life. And so we didn't want that for her, and we knew she didn't want that for us. So we decided to basically turn off the ventilator. After they turned it off, within like 15 minutes, she passed. Yeah, she passed. And yeah.
I think death, no matter how it comes, like from whatever reason, is difficult to make sense of, simply because there is something inside of us that, you know, I mean, from our Christian faith, we're like, we weren't meant to die, you know. We have this, we believe this, we know this, and so no matter which way it comes, it hurts badly each time. And even when you yourself don't experience that loss, when someone you love and care about, and if you're a pastor, you love and care about your church members, so when they lose a loved one, you know, you're also naturally pained for them, and just because death is a really sad. It's sad. We don't like losing our loved ones. We're made for community, togetherness, and as a pastor, I don't know. I don't know that I did an entirely. I don't know. You know, I don't know that I did an entirely good job at comforting people as they experienced loss. But I do know that I was there, and that I was also pained and expressed that. And it's sad and it's hard and it's difficult to make sense of it, whether people are divided or people are united. Like, death is just a difficult thing, and the most, or maybe the best thing that we can do for people as they experience loss is simply to be there with them in their pain.
And hospitals across the country in dire mode, bracing for the demand of more patients. Staffing shortages are a challenge as healthcare workers fight the virus themselves.
It's reassuring. That reassures me, because I think, well, if you get emotional, then that's good. I'm not as cynical and hardened as I thought I was after 23 years, and I think that's a good thing. But it's pretty crazy, and yeah, it is pretty crazy and unprecedented.
You know, having to be there to hold their hands while they go. You know, sometimes families don't make it in time, and you're with them while they slip away. So it is traumatizing. It's very difficult.
So would Jesus wear and promote the wearing of essentially pointless pieces of fabric?
I think I can go on record and say, I think Jesus, in the midst of that confusing time, probably would have done whatever to make people feel safe and to make people feel comfortable. So I think he probably, he would have wore a mask around people who wanted him to wear a mask. Whether or not it was the correct sanitary option or not, I think he would have tried to make people feel comfortable. That's not a political statement. If I were to give a piece of advice to church folks, it would be to try to be like Jesus to other people. I don't know that we need to be so political.
So when I first came to Southern, I was like on a good routine, doing devotionals, praying, and all these things. And then towards the second semester, my mom gives me a call, and she's like, I was diagnosed again with breast cancer. And that's when everything kind of just like went downhill. I was like, okay, well, this is happening again, so I'm just gonna do whatever I want, or I don't know what I was thinking. And it just wasn't as strong. I just didn't really go to God much for anything. I just hung out with the wrong types of people. And then when I became social vice president, that is when I realized that God is there for me no matter what decision I've made. And he put me in this position for a reason. And whatever I do, it shouldn't be because of me. It should be because I want to show others how God can bring joy in their life, because he brought joy in mine, even though my mom was diagnosed.
So I realized that I needed to shift, because I was getting lost in the peripherals of what was going on around me, around the world. And so I grabbed my Bible and I started to read, and I found in Luke, I think chapter 11, where it's talking about how these things are expected and will happen. And when I saw that verse, man, that really helped me to start my shift in my mind. Because I thought to myself, at first I was like, God, why is this happening? Why are you allowing this to happen? How come? What is going on here? Is this the end of the world? I wasn't sure, and I was quite stressed about feeling lost in what is going on. But as I read in the Word of God that these things would transpire, I then was able to it was that led me to the shift of, wait a second, this is going to happen, it is expected, so I don't need to have fear. As long as I hold on to the hand of God and walk with him, I will be fine despite a pandemic, despite whether there are pestilences or wars or whatever it might be. By the hand of God, I will be safe. That is my safe haven. I'm not necessarily safe in how much food I stocked or masks I had purchased. It was by the hand of God, and the Bible said it. And when I read that really was the shift for me.
Just because something happens in life doesn't mean that God is punishing you. It's just a challenge that he wants you to overcome.
I know the biggest lesson I learned is the value of time.
For me, community is not being on Zoom or having Zoom parties. It's more about interacting with others and just being in their presence, like hugging or hanging out or eating together. Before COVID happened, I took it for granted about hanging out with others.
This is I'm not new saying this, but many people would say that they spent the most time ever with their family members, their loved ones, during the pandemic because they were forced to. The other ancillary things don't mean that much. And so am I really intentionally investing in my relationships with my family, with my friends, with the people who I care about the most?
Treasure the time that you have, especially with the people closest to you, because you never know when it's gonna be their last or your last time with them. So just always treasure the good moments.